In G.K. Chesterton's introduction to the Book of Job, he explores the Book of Job and its meaning. In this video, I'm going to be taking you through the main ideas present within his introduction, and to make things easier to learn, I've mapped out the ideas visually in a chart. Let's jump straight into it. At the beginning of the introduction, Chesterton points out that there are two riddles to consider: the historical riddle and the philosophical riddle. I'll begin, as he does, with the historical riddle. And the question he raises at the beginning is which parts of the book belong to the original scheme and which ones were added later. Now, the common trend of thought at the time Chesterton was writing is that the three inserted parts were the prologue, the introductory section, the young man's speech at the end, and then the epilogue, the sort of ending comments and conclusion, wrapping it up. But Chesterton immediately wants to point out that whenever you're confronted with an artistic creation, which is, as you'll see, how he views the Book of Job, gradual growth in the case of an artistic creation is not a bad thing. The original writers of the Book of Job didn't really place as much importance on the actual date or the specific author of the work. Chesterton even goes so far as to say that our modern obsession with these points of knowing who the actual author was and what was the actual date, he thinks this is a consequence of the world's almost insane individualism. So it's very common to hear things like Moses was not written by Moses, or Homer was not written by Homer, and these statements, and statements like these, are often conversation enders. And it's as if pointing out that a specific text might have been authored by many people somehow invalidates the text itself. And Chesterton wants to point out to you that if others did interpolate, insert additional passages, this is not really as shocking a thing as modern man supposes, and it definitely shouldn't be a conversation ender. Chesterton says that the creation of a tribal epic, such as a tribal poem or a tribal book or a tribal story that's passed from one generation to the next, he points out that this tribal epic is to some extent regarded as a tribal work. It's like the building of a tribal temple, which is going to involve many people, but each one of those people that contributed to the building of the structure is going to see a part of themselves reflected in what they've created and what they've helped build and what they've helped bring together. And so Chesterton says that you're really free to believe that elements of Job were inserted after the original work was finished, but please, he says, don't think these additions are anything like additions you're going to find in a modern book. So think of an author that writes something and then sends it to somebody else to be read, and that person critiques it and decides to add something. In fact, he decides to add an entire section that he thinks the book is missing. Now, those two people don't necessarily know each other, and even if they do know each other, it's not going to match the kind of large-scale connection and cohesion you're going to find in a tribal society where people are passing stories down to the next generation as those stories have been passed down to them. This is nothing like me sending you a piece of writing and you adding a few chapters to that. Chesterton doesn't really elaborate further. He doesn't explore the historical riddle all that much. It's really just the beginning of the introduction. We now turn to what really is the introduction and what Chesterton spends the rest of the introduction talking about and explaining. We come now to the philosophical riddle. What is this riddle we need to untangle? Well, Chesterton begins not specifically with the Book of Job, but by looking rather at the Bible itself and specifically the Old Testament, and he points out that the Old Testament is not a loose library without unity. Now, it's not a mistake to view the Bible as a library, as a collection of books, right, featuring different genres, different ideas, different authors, exploring experiences that people are going through from different angles of life. It's not wrong to view the Bible that way, but it would be wrong to view the Bible as a loose library. So the Old Testament is not a loose library without unity. But interestingly, the Book of Job does still stand apart from many of the books in the Old Testament canon. Now, this central unity of the Old Testament, which I'm going to reveal to you in a moment, this is there and it is present in the Book of Job. And yet at the same time, the book of Job is unique. It stands apart from most of the Old Testament canon in a special way, which we're also going to explore shortly. So a good question to answer at this point would be, well, what is the central unity within the Old Testament? What is the commonality between the various books? Chesterton names it. He says it's the loneliness of God. Now, the loneliness of God is quite a deep topic, but Chesterton narrows it down to the point that God is effectively the main character in the Old Testament. Compared to God's clearness of purpose, all the other worlds, all the other human worlds appear automatic. The patriarchs and the prophets, they are God's hammer and saw. They're God's tools. But of course, the hammer and the saw are not equal in nature with the carpenter using those tools. There's a few verses that Chesterton references in Isaiah chapter 40 verse 14. With whom hath he, God, taken counsel, and who taught him the right way, and taught him knowledge, and showed to him the way of understanding? In Isaiah chapter 63 verse 3, it says, I have trodden the winepress alone. From the nations no one was with me. And then in Isaiah chapter 40 verse 22, it says, God sits enthroned above the circle of the earth, and its people are like grasshoppers. He stretches out the heavens like a canopy and spreads them out like a tent to live in. Chesterton then says that God's personality in the Old Testament is so asserted that it almost asserts the impersonality of man. In the book of Psalm, chapter 127, verse 1, it says, Except the Lord build the house, they labor in vain that build it. Except the Lord keep the city, the watchman waketh but in vain. So compared to the divine purpose, man's will is almost obliterated. The book therefore stands alone, since it asks, what is the purpose of God? God's will is so overwhelming, God's majesty is so great. Well, what's the purpose of God? Is it worth the sacrifice of our wills for a will that is grander and kinder? And is it grander and kinder? Now, these are amazing questions, and these are the questions that the book of Job wants to explore. This is the philosophic riddle of the book of Job. So Chesterton then points out the intellectual beauty of the book of Job, because the book of Job wants to know the actuality. It wants to know what is and not just what seems to be. It's not satisfied with illusions. It wants to know what is actually happening. And if there is an illusion, what is beneath or behind the illusion? And if there's nothing behind the illusion, and the illusion is an illusion for its own sake, why? Modern men have this tendency to reduce people down to just their temperaments. So the two temperamental positions that Chesterton's going to explore is this temperamental description of the optimist and then of the pessimist. Now, Chesterton had a lot of interesting insights onto the nature of the optimist and the nature of the pessimist. Now, if you'd like to learn more about that, I've included a link in the description of this video, which will take you to a video I did exploring the topic. So Job's three friends, they try and comfort Job, and they try and reconcile what he's going through by providing reasons as to why he might be experiencing the suffering he's experiencing. And from the outside, these comforters might look like optimists, and Job might look like a pessimist. But, Chesterton points out, Job is not a pessimist at all. If Job is either one, a pessimist or an optimist, he's an optimist, a perplexed optimist, an exasperated optimist, an outraged and often insulted optimist, but he is an optimist nonetheless, because Job wishes for the universe to justify itself, not so that he can catch it out, but because he really wishes the universe to be justified. Just as a wife demands an explanation from her husband, whom she really respects, so too Job awaits God's explanation. What's going on here? Job demands an explanation from his Maker because he's proud of his Maker, because he loves his Maker. Job strikes insanely at the heavens, he lashes at the stars, but it's not to silence them, it's to make them speak. While the comforters of Job are the official optimists, Chesterton says they're actually the true pessimists. They really believe not that God is good, but that he's so strong, it's judicious to call him good, right? It's judicious for me to worship this God because it's going to be to my benefit at the end of the day. Which to me strikes me as a very pagan view of the gods, right? We need to keep the gods happy, make sure that the gods are worshipped because they're so powerful that if we don't, they could just wipe us out. Of course, the best part of the book of Job is when God himself enters. Interestingly, God doesn't answer Job's questions, but instead begins asking more questions. In this drama of skepticism, God himself takes up the role of the skeptic. God, as a consequence, turns rationalism against itself, and God then takes on this enormous humility. He's willing to be prosecuted, but he just asks for the same right that every prosecuted person has, which is he wants to cross-examine the witness. Okay, Job, you've had your turn to ask questions, so let me ask you a question. Who are you? Now, when God asks Job who he is, Job doesn't know. And what's interesting here is Chesterton brings in a kind of an additional point, but of course it's related. And he says that men who have religious faith have also philosophic doubt. Now, at some point in your religious faith, you're going to get to a wall of mystery, a wall of riddles, and you're not really going to be able to apply rationalism to that in the same way you do on a Monday morning. Where if you acquiesce and allow the sheer wonder of the unknown to just rattle your soul, eventually you'll get to the end of the rationalist bridge that you've built. At which point you'll come face to face with an eternal and immense mystery, and a mirror that perhaps reveals the ultimate mystery of all, is that you don't really know who you are. And that doubt stands right there with you as you look up at the cataclysmic riddle which stands before you, which is at the end of the bridge of rationalism and the end of the bridge of reason. It is doubt that has been pushed to the end of doubt, which is where one begins to doubt the one who is doing the doubting. And so God doesn't enter to answer riddles, but to propound them, as is the nature of mystery. Job is suddenly satisfied by this presentation of something he can't get into, of something impenetrable. And Job, and I just love this line by Chesterton, he writes, Job feels the terrible and tingling atmosphere of something which is too good to be told. You see, the refusal of God to explain his design is itself a burning hint of his design. And then you'll find what I think is one of the most beautiful things Chesterton ever wrote, which is the riddles of God are more satisfying than the solutions of man. God then rebukes both the man that accused him and the men who defended him. He knocks down the optimists and the pessimists with the same hammer. See, the optimist is seeking a rational and consecutive pattern within the world, but God insists on the inexplicableness of everything. Remember what we said earlier, he turns rationalism against itself. And God then presents to Job in a psalm, in a song, a rhapsody of wonder, a panorama of created things, of creation before his eyes. So Job came into this wanting to interrogate God, but God answers with exclamation, with more mystery. So instead of just showing Job, the world's pretty strange, and the world is inexplicable, God says that it's not just that the world is strange as you think of strange. The world is even stranger than you can think. It's even stranger than you could possibly imagine. And I think this is such a useful thing to think about, right? To think about whenever we think of something strange or we think of something weird, we're already using, in a way, our understanding of those concepts to inform those images. But what is beyond those conceptual boundaries we have, right? What is beyond even our idea of what strange is? Now, it's at this point that Chesterton begins to put the final pieces together so that he can conclude this introduction. Job isn't told that he's being punished for his sin, and he's also not told that you're being punished because through this suffering I'm going to make you stronger. And what's really astounding here is that Job isn't being tormented for being the worst. It's actually because he was the best. Now, man is most comforted by paradoxes. And you might not know, but G.K. Chesterton was called the Prince of Paradox because he wrote about and with paradoxes constantly. So what are we supposed to make of the statement, man is most comforted by his paradoxes? Well, the way I think about it is that paradox is actually sanity. You live within paradox, actually, really every day. A good example of this would be determinism and free will, right? You have the sense that you're free, and I personally believe you have free will. But at the same time, there are elements of your past that seem to have determined you, right? Like the most basic would be your parents meeting and having you. So in some ways, things are determined, but at the same time, I feel like I'm free. And then if I think about it logically, if everything is kind of mechanistic and going accordingly as machinery would, well then, in a way, everything's determined, even this feeling of having free will. But you see, it's sanity that allows a man to go, well, you know what, maybe I'm determined and I'm free. Maybe that's the paradox. Maybe it's not one or the other. Maybe it's both and. And it's that ability, that willingness to embrace paradox that actually keeps a person sane. Well, this is Chesterton's point anyway. So it's actually the paradox that comforts you. It's not the paradox that drives you insane. Trying to make sense of paradoxes will drive you crazy. So what is the paradox that Job is pointing to? Well, remember, he wasn't punished because he was the worst of men. He was punished because he was the best. Okay, so best man punished. Okay, well, the best man had the worst possible fortune. And then Chesterton says, well, you know, if there's one Old Testament figure who truly is a type of something to come, it's Job. Because what is Job a type of? Well, the most innocent man punished in the most awful way. And Chesterton ends his introduction by pointing out that one only needs to consider what is prefigured in the wounds of Job, and you will see the wounds of Christ. Hi guys, Dylan here. Thank you so much for watching the whole video. I know it's pretty long, so I'm very appreciative that you stuck it out to the end. I'm actually selling that chart that I designed for the video. I'm selling basically a downloadable, high-quality PDF version of the chart, and it's a way for you to get something and also support the work that I'm doing here. Any support you guys give really just goes straight back into the channel, or it helps me support my family. And $2 might not seem like that much to you, if you're an American, but the exchange rate in South Africa is pretty terrible. So that $2 goes a very, very long way. So I've put together a website, existentialdelight.click. You'll actually see it on the screen right now. And on that website, if you go to that link, which will be in the description of this video, there is a big button here, get it now, where you can purchase this chart if you like it, if you want to support the channel and get this cool chart for yourself. Also, this website has a donate option, and there's also a contact me page where if you want to send me questions, if you want to send me recommendations for videos, or you just want to reach out to collaborate on a project, feel free to use this website to do it. The website is very bare bones at the moment. This is the first time I've put a chart like this together, but pretty much the foundation's there, and I'm just going to keep adding and adding and adding, and I've got a lot more videos similar to this one planned coming in the near future. Please check out hooksounds.com if you want high quality, royalty-free music like the music I used in this video. All the music you heard all the music you heard was Hook Sounds. I think the music is genuinely beautiful. And of course, at the center of most creative projects is the music. If you use the promotional code Dylan10, that's DYLAN10, Dylan10, you'll get a 10% discount on Hook Sounds, on any subscriptions. Then you get access to unlimited high-quality music like the music you heard in this video. They are my sponsor. That's why I'm plugging them here at the end. Thank you very, very much for your time. I hope that you enjoyed this video and you got something grateful out of it. I hope that it gave you some existential delight. And on that note, I'm going to say goodbye, and I'll see you in the next video. God bless. Bye.